Hello again, and welcome to Media War Stories, behind the scenes tales from the front lines of the media. I'm your host, Tom Curley. Welcome to yet another show, and another show with this goofy guy, Mr. Gary Armstrong, veteran Boston TV reporter. Gary, how the hell are you today?
I'm okay. I think we both got a little bit more sleep than we usually get. But I have to remind folks that in 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 um, in our years after working, we'll never get enough sleep catching up with all the sleep we lost. So I'm glad you got to sleep a little extra. I was only a half an hour ahead of you, so I'm feeling okay.
Yeah. I totally agree. So before we start, I got the coolest thing in the mail. All right, which you might not appreciate, but Frank Dunn, old and dear friend of ours, also a
Hmm.
veteran of WVHC, the Hofstra radio station, had when I was doing my comedy show, Fulton's Folly, which we've talked about on the show.
Right.
One of the things that we did, we used to have phone-ins, and we used to do trivia contests a lot because, quite frankly, we didn't know what else to talk about. And near the end
Okay.
of our run, if people won the trivia we would give them Fulton's Folly bogus bucks, which were redeemable for any product that we sold or advertised on Fulton's Folly, which of course were all jokes, so they were completely useless. However, they became very popular. And Frank, as it turns out, had some, and he mailed them to me. Here it is, an honest to God
Oh
Fulton's
wow!
Folly bogus
Wow!
buck. Trying to hold it. Wait a minute.
Boy, oh boy!
Why is it I can't?
That's really
There we go.
cool.
And then on the other
So
side,
what was Frank's
it says, "The United We trust penguins. One
face?
bogus buck." We they we gave out dozens of these things. So thank you, Frank. This is truly a momentous occasion. I mean, this is literally this is literally something from over a half a decade, a half a century ago,
That's a
50 years
historic
ago.
document.
And exactly, and these things, oddly enough, are still redeemable. Redeemable they're redeemable for products
Did
like
you know
this.
that many of the most popular songs you hear in today's elevators and shopping malls were in fact written by the great masters? Yes, that's right. Most of these songs were written by the Beatles. And now, the Long John Sump Pump and Bassinet Society is offering you this special edition recording, The Beatles, The Elevator Years. You'll hear great selections like and who could forget? That's the Beatles, the Elevator Years. And now, here's your announcer to tell you how to order.
Call 1-900 P.O. Box 797 St. Louis, Missouri 60609. Check money order, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, not accepted.
That is great. That is great.
Yeah, and that was one of our sponsors. We also had the Hasty Tasty Storm Door and Vigorous Collection Agency. We had Amalgamated Bean. Every day is Bean Day. And oh God, I can't remember some of the. Hard on Glue comes hard in the jar. Um, there was just so many. There was one great one. I can't. Tom Romeo, I think his name was. It was called Extreme Unction. It was a cream. It was a cream that would allow you to get rid of hellish itching and scratching. And it was and he did it like a Gregorian chant, also available in moderate and mild unction for less severe problems. And he kept going, I'm going straight to hell for this. I'm going to hell for this. I said, I don't care. It's a funny bit. Oh yeah. So the last couple of shows that we've been doing, the trial was going on, Now, when this airs, the trial will have been over for a while, and guilty, 34 counts of guilty. Do you realize that now? I don't
Oh yeah.
catch the number. The Midas Touch guys do it. Now it's like over 40 different jurors have unanimously voted to convict him on whatever the trial was for. Be it E. Jean Carroll, rape, defamation, tax fraud, and now, he's a convicted felon. And yet, all right, do you honestly believe that the United States, that this country is going to vote for elect a convicted felon? Have we gone this crazy? Really?
Well, he's still using they're coming out, they're doing this to me, but they're really doing it to you. In a way, he's saying I'm sacrificing my life for you. It's not about me, it's about you. And he's trying to pretend that, he's a savior of sorts. And there are people who are down on their luck who obviously buy into this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I have to read this to you before we continue. One of our super fans, Alex Panzetta. Hey, Alex. He texts me usually after most of the shows, usually to point out what I misspelled or what I got wrong and what I hate. That he's always right. So he writes. So this the last week's episode, I believe, is where we discussed a better way to run elections. Run them like they like they do reality shows, and also that we should change the government and only elect actors that have played government roles. Says, you sound like you blew a gasket, so here's what your next opening should be. Hello and welcome to Media War Stories. It has been brought to my attention that my tenor in the last episode was described as disturbed and unhinged. Upon review, I have to agree and should not be hosting this show. Instead, I am running for president. I should run this country. Therefore, I, Thomas Curley, announced my candidacy for a write-in vote for presidency of the United States. I am the president you need now, though not the one you deserve. If elected, I promise you, the American people, to be shocked and appalled by the shoddy manner in which you cast your vote. However, if elected, I do not even need to promise it. Everyone lives to get better Everyone lives get better automatically. Please get out the vote and support the campaign, which will consist entirely of this announcement. Oh, and you're my running mate. here's the thing to put on the hat. TC and GA 2024. Really, how much worse could it get? This has untapped potential for the show. Not for either of you to get into the White House, but I think you two might make satirical and cogent observations from this format. It would work at least until November. Anyway, I've given you two as much as the benefit of my wisdom and experience as I can. Up to you if you run with it. Have a good week.
That's great. That is great.
Everybody forgets Pat Paulson famously ran for president while the Smothers Brothers show was on the air and gave some of the most absolutely brilliant political speeches. Randy Rainbow is currently running for president, also hilarious. Yes, maybe there should be a rule that all third-party candidates should be an unserious comedian.
When after we did the show, I started thinking about all the people who are, kind of bizarre Gary Busey types, and I kept thinking about he could be good, she could be good, and this is not really a good way to think when you're probing your mind about who you would vote for, but that's the state of the country right now. The Three Stooges.
Yeah, but I still. Oh my God, the Three Stooges. They'd be great. Oh, they'd be great.
Oh
What could
yeah.
the Three Stooges do? Yeah, we'll have to think about that one. The Three Stooges and the Marx Brothers. Um, yeah, yeah, they could be the nationals. They could be the National Security Council. Absolutely. Um,
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
anyway. Move moving on. Before the show,
Yeah. Well.
and I hope we remembered it because we said we were going to write it down. You had a funny story about a news director.
Oh yes. Yeah. This news director was one of the. He was one of the two. I keep emphasizing this because you and I both know how rare it is to get an executive or a suit, as we call them, who's compassionate with his workers. This guy was one of the two that I encountered in my 31 years in Boston as a reporter. At any rate, he called me in one day, and he had a cassette, and so had this had to be back in the 80s when we were still using cassettes, I believe. And he called me in and he said, "This is," he said, "Gary, I know that your behavior sometimes leaves unanswered questions, which is probably a diplomatic way about talking about my behavior." And he said, "This cassette was brought to me by my boss and brought to me by his boss. In other words, the general manager and the program director of the TV station." And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" And he said, "Well, I had this tape, whatever the story was." And he said, "On the second line where you put down the reporter and his technical crew," he said, "My bosses want to know if we're using illegal aliens." Remember, this is back in the 80s when I don't believe that was so much of a big deal. And I said, "What the heck are you talking about, boss?" And he said, "Gary, look at this." And I looked at it and I said, "What's wrong with it?" And he said, I don't see any names of any people I know. All I see on the line of uh, the people who did the tape, I see Kaching, I see the chief, and I see the Buddha." And he said, "I know I'm going for diversity, but who the hell are these guys?" And I said, "You don't know?" And he said, "No, no, no. I'm supposed to have a complete knowledge of all of my employees, but as much as we're going for diversity, I don't believe we have a Chinaman on the staff. I don't believe we have a Native American, and we don't have a Buddhist." And I said, "But don't you know who Kaching is?" And he said, "No." "Don't you know the story of Kaching?" And he said, "No." I said, "But you're the news director." He said, "Oh, wait a minute. That's the guy who sits at the cash register and tallies his fees." And I said, "Yeah." "Do you know who that is?" And he said, "Oh my God, that's you." I told my wife we had a laundryman working for us. And I said, "No, no, no, that's racist. That's not fair." "Well, who's the chief?" That happened to be a friend of mine who was had been elected the chief of the cameramen in the union at the station. So he was nicknamed the chief. And the third person who was called the Buddha, he was a guy who was older than both of us. And he had a head that was bald. And think of Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now when you get a figure of the head I'm talking about. And so we used to call him the Buddha. The Buddha could sit in a newsroom, in a news conference at the State House, and he could stately sit there and fall asleep. At any rate, those were the three nicknames. So the news director looks at me and says, "This is crazy, even for you. This is really wacko, and we could get into trouble if sensitive people of importance looked at it." And I said, "Well, nobody else knows it, but everyone in the building knows who these people are." And he said, "Gary, you guys are going to give me a headache, give me a heart attack." And we said, "No, we would never do that. That's done in jest and done in good taste." And he says, "I don't know, but I got to tell you, you guys are driving me crazy. And maybe you belong not in television, but maybe you belong behind bars." And I said, "Well, you're taking this a little more difficult than you really should. Just have a sense of humor." And he said, "I'll show you my sense of humor. Get the F out of my office." And I just laughed as I walked out. And as I walked out of his door, I heard him giggling. And from that point on, whenever tapes came to be labeled, we would think of the wackiest things. One of the tapes we handed him was from uh, Chico, Groucho, and Zeppo. and I heard him screaming as he got the tape, and all the screaming was Armstrong, get into my office, and that went between the lines or whatever. But that was a tape story, and I always thought, I think behind this is the thing that you always described. You have to have fun with what you're doing, as long as what you're doing is a business. Why not have fun with it? So
Yeah,
there's that.
exactly. Exactly.
Yes,
You know,
yes, yes.
I'm sorry. Getting back to what we were talking about earlier. Now that I'm thinking about it, I actually did have a long, an unusually long political career. I ran for office.
Okay.
Um, I'd say probably a good 6, maybe 7 years in a row, from when I was in junior high school and then high school. Um, I
Wow.
ran for the president of the student union. Okay, now
Okay.
back in junior high school and in high school, the same people won every year. The same guy was elected
Hmm.
president, the same girl was elected vice president. It was the same because they were the
Right.
popular kids in school.
Right.
All right. But somebody had to run against them. And that person was me. I ran every year and I never ever won. And here's the thing. I
Oh,
knew I was never going to win, and everybody knew I was never going to win. So to
right.
me, it was an opportunity to do stand up in front of the entire class, the entire school, because they'd put everybody in
Ah,
the auditorium and then you'd have a debate. All right. So I remember
right.
I ran on the vice and virginity ticket. I was for the one and against the other. And every year I would do something sillier. And I remember
Yeah.
people would. One year I, I did the whole thing in double talk. Um, there was a famous character.
Perfect.
I think it was Professor Irwin Corey. Professor Irwin Corey, I think his name was, and he
I
he was
remember
he
him
used to be
well.
on the Ed Sullivan Show. Yeah, and all he did was double
Yeah.
talk. He just talked nonsense,
Yes.
and I got up there and it was something like, "Ladies and gentlemen, you must elect me because if you do not elect me, then I will not be elected." And I got to tell you, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired at the condition of everybody being sick and tired.
Right.
Can't we all just get some rest? And you, yeah, I'd look out and all the students are like, and in the background, my English teacher was laughing her ass off because she was the only one that got it. And
Yeah.
kids would come up to me afterward and they go, "Tom, I got to tell you, you gave the best speech. I didn't vote for you, of course, but you gave the best speech." And I would go, "Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks." So all
Oh,
right, all right. What the hell? We are now officially running for president on the vice and virginity ticket because how much worse could it be?
well,
So anyway, you had another story.
that's a Mel Brooks line, right?
That's a
But you
number,
know what
right?
you just described, the speeches you gave, uh, they were funny back then. But golly, think about today when he gets up and goes bing bong 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 boo ba ba.
Bang bong
That's
bong bong.
nonsense.
You're right. You're right. I oh my God, you're
Absolutely.
right. Here's the problem. I don't think I don't think I can make a speech that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, I think that, no matter how hard I tried,
Right.
there might be an actual grammatically correct sentence in there. Um,
Right.
Actually, I'd be thrilled if the
The
guy, Orange Julius, could just finish a sentence. Have you noticed that lately? He never
right.
finishes a sentence. It's just word salad. And I can see because I've
Right.
been watching this long enough that I can see in his demented mind what he's referring to. He'll say a snatch of a conversation and he's referring to something that
Right.
happened like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and I don't know if his people understand it. To me, what he's saying is like a Rorschach test. It's a random word salad that if you're demented, you can go, oh, he said what I believe because he said three words that I know. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't know.
Did you I need a frame of reference from you. Did you watch The Apprentice back when it was the big deal on TV and he was the host? Because I never watched that. So I'm wondering how close this person is to the person who was the TV uh, host. Is there a correlation? Is it the same thing?
That is an that is an ex. No, he's yes and no. Okay, there's an article out. One of the producers, go and look it up online. It was at the headline of the Huffington Post and a bunch of other news organizations. One of the directors, no, one of the producers of The Apprentice, they all signed NDAs, and those non-disclosure agreements have expired. So he wrote a complete tell-all of what it was like to do The Apprentice. Okay, now you have to remember that this was based on a book written by a guy named Tony Schwartz, who has been apologizing it ever since. He is called The Art of the Deal. He wrote it.
Hmm.
He created it. He created this persona of Donald Trump being this great businessman. It's all made up. All right, it's completely ghost written, and he has actually petitioned the Library of Congress to reclassify the book as fiction. He donates the proceeds to it to charities to fight Trump. He's,
Right.
he real because of this book. Mark Burnett, who should also there should be a class action suit against, turned it into The Apprentice. He took that book, which was fiction, and then turned it into a TV
Right.
show, which was bigger fiction. And his description, this is amazing. Okay, the first thing when they went into Trump Tower, their first thing is that it's really just dingy. It's really crap. And it's mostly condos, and there's, a couple of floors maybe of commercial space. So they had to build a set.
Right.
They built that boardroom set. That was completely built. Trump
Okay.
was minimally involved in the beginning, okay? And because you remember in the 1950s there were the game show scandals where
Right.
contestants were given the answers. So there is federal law that the FCC enforces that producers of these reality shows can't give the answer. So in this case, they couldn't tell Trump who to pick. All right, and
Right.
he wasn't there when they would film all this stuff. So they would film all this stuff, and then they would tell him in a meeting, all right, this guy, did this, this guy did that. We think that, this guy should win or this guy. And then Trump would pick
Mhm.
one, and then they would go back to the editing and they would edit all the footage so that it looked like this guy should win. Okay. Now, in the very
Right.
first season, which I confess, and I am ashamed to confess, Ellen and I did watch the show for a couple of years until we realized this is just bullshit. But it was all
Well, who
edited to
knew?
make
Yeah.
Trump look good. So, but here's
Right.
where it gets big, and they're trying to find this tape. The very premiere episode, it came down to two people. I don't remember their names, but one was a black guy, one was a white guy,
Mhm.
and they both were like they were stockbrokers. I mean, they both had really, really good jobs, and in the final meeting, and all of this is recorded. Again, they said they recorded any of the background conversations just in case the FCC should ever come after them for violating this game show
Right.
law. So
Right.
this is on tape. And the producer said, well, to be honest, they both did a great job. This was the finale. They said, but the black guy, whatever his name was, he did actually he did a better job. I mean, he had a harder situation.
Right.
He handled it well. And Trump is quoted as saying, and I cannot say this word, he said, yeah, but is America really ready to accept an N-word as the
Mm-hmm.
winner? And the producers all went white, which was hard because they already were white. And they didn't know what to say, all right? And they
Yeah.
fumfered around. And then he tells other stories about he did this all the time. He was misogynistic. He was out at a shoot where they were filming him in a shopping mall, and one of the photographers was a woman. And he said, I don't want that woman. She's too fat. Give me that one over there. She's cute. All right? When they would ask about one of the contestants, Trump would go, oh, you mean the ones with the, you know? And he said he did shit like this all the time. It was appalling. And he also couldn't remember anybody's names because he just didn't give a shit, or he just has a short attention span. So they would take him into a studio, on a microphone, into a booth, into an audio booth, and they would tell him, all right, say this. They would give him lines to say. Okay, this is, hey, okay,
Right.
Gary Armstrong. And then they would edit it into the show. What they would do is that I would be saying something, and then I would then edit in me say, hey, Gary Armstrong, but they would cut to the guy. So I could then edit in, they could edit in Trump's audio. All right. And they did this all the time. So
Got
the
it.
answer is he was
Wow.
demonstrably more lucid back then. And they have recordings of how he can make sentences. He was making relatively, he had a all right. They're saying that back then he had the vocabulary of a 12th grader. No, I think maybe it was a 7th grader. Now, his vocabulary is, I don't know, is limited to a couple of hundred words or something. I mean, he just repeats nonsense. And again, once again, and these stories are coming out again and again, these are signs of dementia. These are signs of dementia. These are signs of cognitive decline. When he argues and he brags that he took this test, the Minnesota, it's MOCA, it's a test that they give to people to determine if they're senile. It's meant to be passed. It's meant to be simple. Because if you fail this test, it means you have declined so much that you need to be put in the memory care section of a nursing home.
Yeah.
So to him to brag that I aced this test, it's just like, well, yes, had you failed the test. So it's absolutely insane. I just and here's and there was one final story. Even though we're running over in this article, they filmed one of the things at one of his golf clubs, and they said the golf club was so, but the main building was gorgeous, and they were interviewing the architect of the building, and this producer said, I got to tell you, your building is gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. And the guy got a little wistful and he said, yes, this was the greatest project of my life, and it's very bittersweet. And he said, why? He said, well, Trump stiffed me on the payment. He paid me half of the money, and then when I finished it, he told me to go screw myself. He wasn't going to pay me. And then he said, well, sue me. And I realized that the legal costs would be more than what he owed me. So then Trump made a counteroffer for pennies on the dollar of what he owed him. And he said, I had no choice but to accept it. And he didn't even pay that. So that's the guy that you're electing.
There you go.
All right. So anyway, we ran out of time. We did it again.
Okay. You're right.
Let's get as quickly as we can to the plugs. Let's see. We're Serendipity Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth, Maryland's blog. Everybody loves it. Speaking of everybody loving stuff, Voicescapes Audio Theater for the best in audio, comedy, and drama half-hour radio show. It's still around. Of course, my sister podcast, Get Off My Lawn. Funny stuff. And a thing that I'm tangentially involved in. It's a thing that you should all listen to. It's on this channel. It's called Between Americans. I guess it's official. We're running for president. See ya.